We never opened a restaurant to make money. Yes, of course, we make money, but we don't do this because we wanted to get rich. It was because this is what we do, and opportunities came on our way. And if you lose some, it's fine, as long as we can pay the bills and we live in a house and the kids can go to school. What more do you need?
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osché Podcast, where honest conversations take the lead. Each week, we sit down with entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, and change makers to unpack how they got from there to here and what they learned along the way. Real stories, no filters, lessons earned through experience, so you can take what's useful and leave the rest. Whether you're tuning in during your commute, a workout, or while making dinner, we're glad you're here. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join in the conversation. Now, let's get into this week's episode.
Today, we'd like to welcome Eelke Plasmeijer to the show. Eelke is a chef and co-owner of Locavore in Bali. He began his culinary journey at the age of 14. Eelke, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. 14, eh? It sounds so long ago. Holy shit.
Yeah. Before we get into it, I just want to go over, I guess, the genesis of the podcast here. So the key premise that the podcast is built on is that others have come before us and accomplished what we are striving for. And a great way for us to all go further faster is to meet those people, learn from their experiences, understand the lessons they picked up along the way, and avoid some of their missteps on our own journey. These interviews have taught me and or reinforced the following. People need people. Start before you're ready. Bet on yourself. Most things that one wants to accomplish will always take longer and be harder than anticipated, unfortunately. But it's a truth. Even though you don't see it, the people you admire for their success, whatever that success may be, have devoted their 10,000 hours to creating that success. Second to last principle here is scared money don't make no money, and go to where you're treated best. Maybe a bit of a long positioning statement there, but that's why we're here. Eelke, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for me today. I wanted to start the origin story here. I was doing some research beforehand, but I read somewhere that you began your culinary journey at 14 in the Netherlands. So as you alluded to before, it seems like that's quite a bit a while ago on the other side of the world almost as well. So paint a picture for me of what that kitchen was like, what that first job was like, what role did you have in the kitchen, and maybe how did that springboard you to where you're at today?
Wow, yeah. My first dream was to become a dustman, so I failed in that one. I don't know, like a garbage man, let's say.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was really cool to ride on those trucks when they still rode on those trucks. And then the second thing and that's the only thing I always remember, is that I wanted to become a cook. Actually, I wanted to become a baker first because my grandfather was a baker's apprentice in his youth. But then I realized that you have to wake up really early when you want to be a baker. So that was not really an option. So I thought, okay, what else? What is close from baking? So cooking was the next thing. Yeah, my first job, my mom kind of got me my first job in the one restaurant we had in my little village in the Netherlands. It's a tiny place, 6,000 people, and we had the one restaurant. And I think she went for dinner one night and she asked the owner, hey, I have this son and he would love to start working in kitchens. Do you have something for him? So I started doing dishes like everybody else in the weekends, in the evenings, next to my high school. And then slowly doing the dishes became making some ice creams, making some desserts, making some salads. And before I knew, I was doing pretty much everything in that kitchen. I was a proper Dutch village restaurant. So it had nothing special, nothing, just hearty, tasty food. Not really all cooked from scratch, but it was a good start. And the owner was really cool. He was this self-trained guy and he cooked a little and he ran the business with his wife. And yeah, he was quite motivational. And yeah, for one thing came another. So after high school, I went to hotel school and I kept on working in the weekends. I moved to field jobs. And then my internship from the hotel school was in a proper Michelin restaurant somewhere in Amsterdam. And that's where it got all a lot more serious. I was already cooking for 5-6 years as a side job next to school, next to college. And then it became serious. And I realized that I made the right decision and that cooking was indeed the thing for me.
Tell me a little bit about your experience in going to culinary school. Was it what you anticipated? And then I guess I'd like to hear maybe a little bit about how that translated into the kitchen.
Yeah, so after my high school, I did hotel school, which the culinary part is quite tiny. So we had one day every 2 weeks in the kitchen, and the other week we were in the service and, being part of front of house. And the rest was just learning how to run a restaurant, run a business, work in a hotel or whatsoever. So the cooking bit was tiny. And it's also not what I wanted to learn at school. I was cooking already a lot in the weekends and in the holidays, and it's more serious restaurant. So I knew that the cooking bit, I was not going to learn it at school anyway. So I was more, okay, I might be a little bit too young to go and work full time. So let's just do this hotel school thing and get it over with until I'm old enough to go and work full time. But then the good thing about hotel school was that the fourth year was a full year of internships, right? So we did 2 internships, 2 5-month internships. And I was the only student of my year that wanted to go into a kitchen, because most people that go to hotel school because they have no clue what they want to do. I think most of them end up in HR or whatever. Most of them don't even end up in the hospitality industry in the first place, I think. So I asked school, can I do a kitchen internship? And they, luckily enough, let me do that twice. And the second one was a really good one. And I did that for 5 months, finished school, and then they let me stay and work there. And then actually I started doing culinary school. But the culinary school in the Netherlands is you go to school 1 day a week and you go and work 4 or 5 days in a restaurant somewhere. So that's what I did after my hotel school. Normally you wouldn't do it that way, but I felt, okay, there's still stuff I can learn at school, which in the end might not have really been the case. So yeah, I worked 5 days a week, and then I went back to the area I was from in the Netherlands, and I would go to school once a week, often not making it there in time or at all, but I think it was fine, because as long as you showed up for your exams and did your cooking exam at the end of the year, you were pretty fine. And I did that for a year. And then that was it, really. So I think it depends on where you are in the world. I think there's culinary schools. For sure, there's good culinary schools. But I think the one for me wasn't really useful, because I was already working in kitchens for quite a few years. So I didn't learn that much new. So I could have skipped it. But it was a good way into working at good restaurants, I think.
Yeah, all part of the journey. I remember just myself, I cooked just in random restaurants, nothing fancy or anything like that. But I got a bachelor's degree, and my first job was in a restaurant. I was a dishwasher, then became a line cook. And again, it wasn't like a scratch kitchen or anything like that, but I was a line cook at 17, 18 years old. And then I cooked in college as I was getting my bachelor's degree. And then after that, I was like, I didn't know what to do. And I was like, I'm good at this cooking thing. I've been doing this for a while. Maybe I'll go finalize this and go to culinary school. And I don't remember the cost necessarily, but one of the things where it turned me off is you go to culinary school 4 or 5 days a week, whatever it was, for a year, 18 months, whatever it was, I don't remember. And then your last 6 months or whatever, you do your externship, and then you go cook in a restaurant. I'm like, I've been doing that. Why would I pay you $30,000 to go get this job? I mean, I've been doing this since 17. I'm sure I know there's things that I could have learned. I know I'm not at 20 some years old. I knew all the things about all the restaurants, but that was one of the turnoffs of, I don't necessarily know if I need to do this, if this is what I want to pursue. Ended up not pursuing that, of course, but
it's a lot cheaper in the Netherlands, so maybe that helps, right? I think most cooks, most chefs will tell you, you don't learn how to cook. That not at the schools I've been to. But I think nowadays there's a lot more interesting. There's not just the cooking that culinary schools are offering, right? This is one really cool school in San Sebastian, which we get some interns from once in a while. And if they would have had those kind of education when I was a young kid, I think I would have maybe went for one of those instead of just cooking. But I guess I didn't, because it wasn't. But yeah, I think it's one of those cool professions that you get better at it by doing it a lot, right? So you might as well do that. And the stuff that they teach you at school is often the stuff that you forget first thing when you enter a restaurant kitchen.
Yeah. So we've gone through like the education and your desire to start cooking. Actually, a quick question before we move on from that. Your grandfather was you said baker in his youth. Was that not his profession as like a adult, or?
No, he only was an apprentice for a baker, and then he ended up being a riverboat captain, so transporting all kind of things on the European rivers. But he kept on baking bread, so I always have this memory of him baking this bread, which was really amazing. Maybe it was not, but you know how it is. And it was really good, and I thought, okay, that's making things that you can eat is cool, because I guess he does this. And so that's also the only culinary connection I have in my family. Nobody. I mean, my mom is a decent cook. My dad has some good dishes up his sleeve, but nobody really runs restaurant, cooks in restaurants or anything. It was just my grandfather who maybe for 2 or 3 years in his youth made some bread.
Yeah. So Netherlands to Indonesia, how does that come about?
Yeah, it was just one big coincidence, really. I could have been China, I could have been Mexico, could have been anywhere, really. But so I worked in this good restaurant in Amsterdam, and my mentor was my sous chef, guy called Stefan. And we first had the plan to open a restaurant together in the Netherlands. So we were quite far ahead with opening something in his hometown. And in the end, it fell through. And so I had to okay, what's the next plan? But I always knew that I wanted to have my own restaurant. That was always the reason I was cooking. I just wanted to have my own place, cook the food I like cooking and I like serving and I feel good about. But by talking with Stefan, I realized, okay, this cooking thing is great and I really enjoy it, but is this really it, right? He was like 5, 6, 7 years older than me, and he was a really good cook. He cooked in some of the better restaurants in Europe, and he told me, look at me, Eelke, I have nothing, right? I can cook, but I have no girlfriend. I have no money in the bank, no apartment, no nothing. And it's not that it's going to change anytime soon if I keep doing what I'm doing. So I said, shit, yeah, that's very true. But I want that. I want exactly that because I only care about the cooking. But somewhere he did plant the seed, and I started reconsidering and thinking, okay, I love food. I love everything around it. So you know what? What's the other way that I can do with that? I can go back to study and become a food writer. So that's what I tried to do. I quit cooking full-time in restaurant kitchens, and I went back to study journalism with the idea to become a food writer. So again, I moved back from Amsterdam to my hometown. That's what's one of the places you can study journalism in the Netherlands. And then halfway through the first year, he called me and said, hey, Eelke, I got this really cool job offer to open and run a restaurant in Jakarta, Indonesia. Do you want to come with me? I said, yeah, no, because he kind of talked me out of this and I started something new. And now, so I said, no, but you know what? I come and visit you in my summer break. And then he decided to bring another friend of ours to come with him as a sous chef. And I took the plane to Jakarta in that summer after finishing the first year of my study. And then spent a year in Jakarta with them in their restaurant, in their kitchen, traveled to Bali, which is only an hour and a half away from Jakarta. And I had a great time and realized that maybe becoming a food writer was not really in the stars for me. And then they offered me a job saying, the offer still stands. Come and work for us. It's the 3 of us, which might be way too many, but it's out there. It's open. So I said, you know what? I go back to the Netherlands, pack the things I need, and then I come and join you for 1 year or 2 years. So that's what I did. I went back, told my parents, you know what, I'm going to do this for 1 year. I'm going to continue studying online because that was possible. Never opened the website, so that didn't really work out. But yeah, packed my bags and left for Jakarta with the idea to try that for a year or two and then see what's next. And that is now almost 20 years ago. That's the reason I ended up in Indonesia.
When you first landed in Jakarta, it must have been like a sensory overload, right? New continent, new world, new cuisine. What was the biggest culture shock from your classically trained Western chef, Michelin star restaurant, to being in Jakarta at this restaurant, cooking with your friend and mentor?
Wow, yeah, it can't be further apart, right? The thing that I struggle with the most is that you're in this massive, crazy city, right? And we were cooking crazy, stupid food. We were doing French fine dining made with ingredients flown in from all over the world because that's what the owners wanted. Maybe not so much what we wanted, but that's what they wanted in Jakarta. And you was putting caviar on plates, and we had foie gras on the menu, all the ridiculous things. And the guys in the kitchen, they were living somewhere next door in just a little bit more than a slum. So for them, a spoon of caviar was like a big chunk of their salary, and they don't even. So it's not that I dealt with that. I was young. I was 22, 23. I was distracted a lot with all these new things and everything and living somewhere else. But the contrast, the difference between what we were doing on a daily basis, the people we were cooking for, and then the people that were working in our kitchen and that we were interacting with the whole day, that was quite hard to deal with at moments. I would say it's just not right. It's just, why are we, first of all, flying in all these ingredients while we're in this tropical bounty, right? If you would go to a local market in Jakarta, there's so many cool things, so many vibrant tropical products that deserve to be on the menu in a restaurant, but there was nothing. We flew in all our veggies from Australia twice a week. Nothing was really fresh. And I think it was a good thing that the restaurant was a disaster. We never got it to work. It was like I said, 20 years ago, Jakarta was and maybe is not ready, and it should not be ready for a restaurant like this, because it is a little ridiculous to just try to copy paste something you do in Europe in a city like Jakarta. Yeah, like I said, I was young, I was super green, I had no idea what was happening most of the time, and I had a great time. It was fun. It was a very interesting period, but also I realized that this doesn't make sense quite early on. It doesn't make sense to do what we are doing in this setting. One by one, my two friends left. So Stefan left and the other guy that came with us left. They both moved to Bali to start running restaurants and hotels there. So in the end, I was on my own and I said, okay, shit, so what's next, right? And then on that day, funny enough, my current partner, Ray, walked in the door and said, hey, my name is Ray. I'm here for a job interview. I said, okay, please sit down. Let's have an interview. And he came back from living in New Zealand for 10 years. He is from Jakarta. He grew up in Jakarta, but he spent the last 10 years of his life in New Zealand, going to college and then dropping out of college pretty hard. And then he also became a cook. And then, yeah, that's why we met. And we had this, I was like, okay, shit, now on my own. And then he showed up. So we had a really good click. And we run that restaurant for another 6 months together, bringing it nowhere. And then we said, you know what, let's see if we can find a job in Bali ourselves, which is, like I said earlier, only an hour and a half away by plane. And Jakarta is this crazy big city and there's zero tourists, right? Nobody goes to Jakarta for pleasure. It's just business. It's a hustle, right? It's one of those big cities where everybody is hustling the whole day just to make a living. Super tough if you're part of that, I think. And Bali is obviously felt like paradise, right? It's this beautiful tropical island, lots of tourists that are all there to have a good time and eat good food on the holidays. So that was like the next logical step. So we found ourselves a job in Bali, somewhere on the beach, and made the move.
Oftentimes I bounce around in the conversation. I'm going to do that right now. I wanted to get into like the restaurant that you were working at, the first one in Jakarta, out of curiosity. But one of the things that you just had mentioned was the menu, right? Like what you were serving, what you were making, this European menu, vegetables being flown in from Australia twice a week. From my understanding, when you opened up Lower, correct me if I'm wrong, like your ethos is no imports, no dairy, no wheat, utilize everything and with less animal protein as well. Was that driven by your experience at this first restaurant in Jakarta? And if so, why is that still with you today?
I'm not sure it was born out of our time spent in Jakarta doing the food that, in my opinion, didn't really make a lot of sense. But it also did make sense coming where we come from, right? We were all classical trained chefs from the Netherlands, from Europe. This was the food we grew up cooking, right? We had Dover sole and turbo and all the things that you have on a fancy Michelin-star restaurant in those days in the Netherlands. So it made sense. It just didn't make sense in that context. But then I think a lot of places all over the world are doing this. So I think it's not that strange or that weird. It just felt weird for us looking around us and seeing all the things that were available. So yeah, maybe it was born there. But it was just 1 year in, we realized that this is just not right. And it's also not fun to cook with things that come from a freezer, the things that are brought in before they hit your kitchen. They're already not fresh anymore, right? It's just not nice. It's just not what cooking is about. It's also a very conservative profession, right? There's not a lot of brave chefs that actually do something that is different. I think we all get inspired by one chef or two chefs that actually did something that was different and brave and out of the box. And so our whole Locavore concept is not something that we came up with. It's just something we related to and we felt connected to and we saw happening all over the world and said, you know what, this makes sense even more for where we are. With everything that grows here in this crazy, fertile island nation, why are we even bringing something in, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And I think if you enjoy cooking, I think you enjoy cooking with fresh, vibrant ingredients. First of all, maybe in your comfort zone, because we all are conservatives, I think, and you need to be a little bit, okay, let's change this for that, or let's change that for this. And I think it takes time to also get comfortable with your new pantry. It took us years and years because from the moment we left that restaurant in Jakarta until we opened Locavore, I think there were at least 4.5 years in between, 5 years, maybe even. And in those 5 years, we cooked in Bali and we realized, okay, here you can actually get fresh things that are really cool and grown in the right ways. And you just have to dive a little deeper and ask the right questions. And it's all there. You just need to get it in your system and become comfortable with it. And so the moment we opened Locavore, which is now almost 13 years ago, we realized this makes sense, especially where we are. We are in Ubud in Bali, so we in not on the coast. We a little bit further in where it's really green. It rains a lot. It's quite humid. It cools down at night a little. So it makes sense to do what we do. We're quite close from where the farmers grow things. It's an hour and a half to go a little higher where they can grow a bigger variety of things. So I think it just makes sense.
I haven't traveled a ton, but I've traveled enough to experience some things. But one of my biggest joys about traveling and going to other places is local markets. Right. I could name them. Local markets, local fruits and vegetables, eating local, going to restaurants and knowing that the stuff that I saw in the market is on the plate. I get a thrill out of that.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you're enjoying the conversation, take a second to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We'd really appreciate it. You can also find us on Instagram at Randall Osché. That's RANDALLOSCHE. And check out more at podcast.randallosché.com, including show notes and other resources from today's episode. All right, back to the conversation.
You meet Ray at the restaurant Jakarta, go to Bali, work together for 4 more years before 2013 when you opened up the first version of Locavore under the premise at the time, 0 imports, no imported truffles, like we've mentioned, no European influences. When you started the restaurant with Ray, were you looked at as industry visionaries, or did your network of people or restaurateur friends think that you were crazy?
I honestly don't really know. I think we had our heads down most of the time because you know how it is yes, I've been cooking in restaurants for many years, but to run one and to open one in a country that is not yours. I think earlier on you talked about red tape and all those kind of things. Here, everything is gray. Right. So you never really know if you're doing the right thing, as in, is this legal or isn't it legal? You can ask, am I on the right working permit here, guys? Yes. And one day later, they come and visit you and say, you're not. And they fine you and they threaten you to get deported and all that kind of stuff. So in all honesty, when we opened Locavore in 2013, yes, it was all about local produce, but it was also, we were still a lot more cooking in our comfort zones, right? We used locally grown ingredients, but there were often still Western veggies or things. So we had a lot of beetroots and fennel, and we were very excited if our farmer would come to us and say, hey, I'm growing Brussels sprouts or kohlrabi. And so, yes, I know how to cook that. And then I would say a year in running it, we had a little bit more time to look up and to maybe have a thought and a pause and think about what we were doing. And then we said, okay, if we sell local produce, but there's nothing local about a fennel or a radish or a beetroot that is grown from an imported seed. Yeah, it's grown in the Bali soil, but that's it, right? And it's never as delicious and as good as it is in a 4-season country because it's meant to grow there. We're in a volcanic island. Different things should grow here. So that's why we said, okay, what is native? What is from here? What is actually an Indonesian Balinese product? And what are products that have been here for a long time and are now part of the Indonesian diet? Because a lot of things we take for granted are not from here, but they are brought here from Central or South America, often by the Portuguese, the Spanish, through the Philippines to Indonesia. Things like tomatoes and chilies and coffee and cacao and even a lot of the spices that are not even from here, but all the fruits. There's only a few native fruits that I know of. Everything else is from Central America. We said, okay, if it's part of the Indonesian diet, sure, we can use it. It's been here for 350 years. Sure, let's not be, otherwise there's not much left to cook with. And then we start taking, I don't think we start taking ourselves serious, but we start taking our cooking a little bit more serious, and the way we would talk about our menus and we would create our menus. And that's also when we said, it was 1 year in when we said no more dairy, because dairy is not part of the Indonesian diet. Yes, there is a local dairy production happening, but it's all in Java, which is an island further away. So it's all brought in here. It's never great. And the same thing for wheat. So wheat is imported and then milled locally and then sold in bags with Indonesian words on it, but it's not an Indonesian product because they don't grow wheat here. So we say, you know what, let's take that all out of our kitchens and rethink how we do a kitchen without dairy and without wheat. And it took a bit of, you need to throw a lot of recipes away or redo them. But then we did, and it makes total sense. And I think that is important, right? I think you want to cook food that you believe in, you enjoy cooking, and also that makes sense from where you are in the world, right? Why would you come and travel to Bali to come and eat things like, salmon and scallops and Maine lobster and radishes and fennel and truffle, right? It doesn't make any sense. But then again, most restaurants were and are still doing this. It's definitely changing in a positive way. It's a lot easier nowadays to get a locally grown produce, which is great. And I think it's a lot more restaurants use native things on their menus. So I think that's definitely a good change. But how we were seen by our peers, I honestly don't know, because we had no clue what we were doing, really. Yes, I went to hotel school and they taught me how to run a restaurant, but they didn't taught me how to run a restaurant in Bali. And we hit our heads so many times. And like I said, you name a government extension, and I think they came and visited us and asked us for cash and money and whatever. But yeah, we had a great time doing it. At least I did. I think Ray did as well, because we're still going strong, I like to believe. But yeah, it was definitely a little different, the way we were doing things. But it was just a little casual restaurant in Ubud. So it wasn't that at all that didn't really stood out. It was just the food that we were doing that was different than what most others were doing.
I want to talk about the economics a little bit. Like when you and Ray decided to open up Locavore, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about it, how did you pay to start the restaurant?
Yeah, it's no rocket science how to open a restaurant, not here, right? You need a bunch of cash, you need a location, you need a concept, and happy days. So we had a concept, because this Locavore concept we were already doing in the restaurant, in the hotel we were working prior to opening Locavore. And we worked in a hotel. I love hotels, but I don't like working for them or in them. So Ray and I said, you know what, why don't we try and do our own thing? Very small, with a little money. So if it doesn't work, we can always go back work for hotels if we don't owe anybody any money. So we found a location, came up with a business plan, let's call it that, and reached out to friends and families. Hey, I had this elementary school friend who ended up in Asia as well, who was doing really well for himself. I said, you know what, hey, why don't you give me a chunk of money, which for him was nothing, but for me a lot, and we do this restaurant. And he said, you know what, I give you half if you fundraise the other half, and he helped us with that as well. So I had my auntie who was living in Belgium, who said, you know what, yeah, I got some money here you go. And Ray had an auntie somewhere in Jakarta who said, you know what, here's some money, let's do this. It was a little bit here, a little bit there. And I think it was altogether 300,000 US that we needed to open this place. And this is something that might be quite a shocker. That included 8.5-year rent. So 300,000 was to fit out the restaurant, get it started, and pay 8.5 years rent ahead. So we didn't have to worry about it for the years to come. It wasn't really big chunk of money for me back then. It still is, although the restaurant we're running at the moment costs us a little bit more money. But yeah, so it was like family, friends of friends, family of friends, and got it together. In the end, it was 11 people putting some money on the table. The deal was pretty simple. We said, you know what, all the money we make goes back to you guys until we reach a return of investment. And then Ray and I are going to get a majority share of the company. And then you stay on 49%, then we cut it in pieces. And hopefully we all make a bit more money than we put on the table. And that's how we did it. So yeah, no rocket science, really.
How long did it take you to pay back your 11 investors?
Yeah, so luckily enough, the restaurant, in my memory, it was busy from day one. It wasn't, but I was busy from day one. But it happened pretty fast. We had a really good location. The restaurant looked quite nice from the outside. The food was, I think it was very affordable and different and likable. And so it did well from, I would say, month 4, 5, or 6 or something like that. And again, if your rent is paid, and there was only 9 of us in that first setup, so it was very small. The economics of running a restaurant in Indonesia are completely different than they are in the States or in the Netherlands, I would say. So the profit margin can be pretty decent. So it took us, I think, 3 years to pay them back, but it was also because we used the money with their okay, of course, to open another 2 outlets. So we gave them all 4 restaurants for the price of 1. So I think 5 years in, we had 4 restaurants up and running, and they all had a share in those, and they had their money back. So it went pretty fast, and it did really well.
Yeah,
I guess.
I would say so. Then there was a moment, I don't know if you want to call it a burn it down moment from what I read, but by 2016, 17, so you hit Asia's 50 best restaurant list. The reservation book is full. I think by this time your investors have been paid back. You've opened up other locations, but instead of sitting on your hands or just replicating that, if I have it correct, I don't know if you got rid of your first location, but you ceased operations and then you recreated it as Locavore NXT. What was the decision-making process there? We want to expand, we want to reimagine this. We've had success doing it this way, but we've also learned lessons along the way, and we want to incorporate those lessons into this new version of Locavore. What was that moment in time like?
I think you have all the reasons already there. So all of those. And yeah, but I think the main reason was we felt a bit limited with space. So the old venue, the old Locavore was tiny. So we improvised, right? Like I said earlier, we opened more outlets, but the reason to open an outlet was always to create more space for the Locavore restaurant. So we needed more chiller space because we had 0 chiller space in the old venue. So we found this space, I think it was 100 meters down the road, and we built a kitchen with a walk-in chiller. And then we had some space left. Why don't we do a little restaurant in the front where we serve nice food we like to eat ourselves, as in burgers and sandwiches and salads, and within the same concept of Locavore. And so we had space, and the kitchen team was walking back and forth through the streets. And then we felt, okay, if we want to come up with better menus, we need a dedicated kitchen just to work on menus. So we found another space 200 meters down the other way where we had the opportunity to build an R&D kitchen. But then downstairs there was another venue that didn't want to continue, so they gave it to us, and we turned that into an Indonesian restaurant. But so we improvised, right? So we had a walk-in chiller there, we had an R&D kitchen there, we had a bar where we did our beverage program there, and it was fun. But it also felt, okay, if we really want to do something, I don't want to say better, but do something more complete, it would be really cool if we can have all of this under one roof. And it will be very inspiring to have all these people sitting in the same venue, and we don't have to walk through Ubud, crossing the street all the time, popping our heads in there. And so we said, okay, you know what? If we really want to do this proper, we need to go bigger. And we started listing the things we really wanted. So we wanted to grow our own things. We wanted to have 2 restaurants. We wanted to have accommodation. We wanted to have, like I said before, we wanted to have that R&D kitchen as part of it. We wanted to have a fermentation program with its own kitchen, a beverage program with its own kitchen. And we reached out to a friend of ours who is now our creative director. And we say, that's the plan. Can you help us to turn this into something on paper that people can read actually, and turn into this restaurant we really would like to do? So he came up with this really crazy brief that was turned into something we were going to send out to our architects to come up with their own interpretation of this crazy idea. And at the same time, of course, we realized this is going to cost a lot of money, which we don't have, because we push this money into the other venues every time. So we also came up with, this time, I would say, a more proper business plan, because he made it for us, it was not ourselves, and reached out to mostly friends and guests that we knew that could be interested in helping us with this. And in the end, there was one Balinese couple that have been guests and that became friends that said, you know what, we want to do all of this. So we started, when we had the green light for them, we started to reach out to architects and start planning the whole thing, really. But it was like, long story short, I think the limitations we felt in the old venue, and having the chance to do something really from scratch, from an empty piece of land, an empty piece of paper, and to build something up, that was really like, okay, we might have the chance to do this one time. So yeah, we decided to go for it. I think the good thing, and we haven't really talked about it yet, is that both Ray and I don't really think a lot about things. So I think we just, you know what, and that's how we grew, right? Hey, Ray, we have this really good bartender. His name is Raka. Shall we open a cocktail bar for him? Yeah, okay, sure, let's do it. We are butchering our animals in-house. Should we open a butcher shop so we also make it available for other people? Yeah, sure, why not? So it really it never felt stressful. It was really always very organic. Not anymore. It's quite stressful now, but that's a different story. But it felt like, we grew into this, and it felt like the logical next step. And also, there's not many, I would say, locations in the world where I would be brave enough or crazy enough to do something like this, like Locavore NXT, because it's big. It's pretty out there. To make this financially sustainable is pretty tricky. So I would never do it somewhere in the West, right? Yeah, maybe Indonesia, maybe Vietnam, maybe Thailand, but not a lot of countries where this would work. And it's not working yet, but where this potentially could work.
I'm sure it will work. So before, you had mentioned the part about you and Ray not thinking, I wrote down a question that I wanted to ask. It seems like, from listening to your story so far, that instead of seeing a challenge, you see an opportunity, right? You don't dwell on the fact that your kitchen space is small or that you don't have enough chiller space at present, but then you see the opportunity that the venue down the street comes available. It has chiller space. Let's lease that. Let's turn that into something. But I get a sense that you don't see these as obstacles. You see them as opportunities to grow. And I guess my question is that an accurate assumption of how to move through the world? And I think that maybe ties in a little bit with the premise of you and Ray not thinking. I think that you obviously say that in jest, but I think there's a degree of a lot of people love to plan. And even in my day job, we've been talking a lot lately about one of the key tenets in the positioning statement of the podcast of start before you're ready. And it seems like you don't see the challenges, you see them as opportunities, and you're like, we don't know if this is going to work out or not, but let's give it a shot and then see what happens. Is that an accurate sort of reflection of like how you and Ray decided to move through the restaurant business?
Yeah, I think so. Like you say, a lot of people, they tend to overthink things and then decide there's always a reason not to do something, right? It's easier actually to come up with a lot of reasons to say it's better maybe not to move ahead with this than with the reasons that do make sense and to go ahead with it. But if you don't really think about those options, the not thinking part is obviously part true, part not true, because we have responsibilities financially, not only towards our investors, but also now to a team that is almost 300 people strong. I think what I'm trying to say, we're easy at shrugging off these thoughts and these feelings of, that's actually quite a lot that we are actually doing at the moment. But also, I think we can because we have a great team around us, right? It's the biggest cliche, right? But it's absolutely true. You can't do anything if you don't have the right people working with you. And we, from day one, were lucky enough to have the right people around us. And some of those people are still with us. And we found other people along the way. And I think what I'm doing these days is just, what's the word? I make them do their jobs and take away obstacles they might walk into and avoid those from being in their way. Yeah. And also with Ray, we all know who is good at doing what. So let them do what they're good at. And let us do the things that I know they're good at. And I'm also not good at it, but at least that's my problem, right? It's my business. Let me deal with those things. And I think the partnership that Ray and I have, I think it's really, really set up in that way. We obviously are both cooks. We love cooking. We obviously spend too much time away from our kitchens because that comes with growing. I think Ray spends more time in kitchens and he's now the better cook. I always like to believe I used to be the better cook, but it's not a competition. But he does things besides the cooking bit. So he does a big chunk of our HR. He does our intern programs. I do finance more than he does. I do the PR and the marketing bit more than he does. I think I do more future business opportunities than he does. But he does the thing that nobody likes, which is obviously, the HR bit. And it's a necessary evil, right? But he does it. And I do the finance, which I don't like, but I got into it. And so if it's a little bit of, I don't know what I'm trying to say really, but it works. And yes, we had massive failures. We opened a restaurant in Jakarta in almost at the same time when we opened Locavore NXT, which maybe was part of the problem that we opened it so close from each other. And that didn't work for a whole bunch of reasons. And we lost a ton of money. But again, we never opened a restaurant to make money. Yes, of course, we make money, but we don't do this because we wanted to get rich. It was because this is what we do. And opportunities came on our way. And if you lose some, it's fine. As long as we can pay the bills and we live in a house and the kids can go to school and we can go on a holiday, then what more do you need? So I think things will go wrong and things will go down and deal with it. I think this country, Indonesia, I think the government might be, I'm not going to compare us with the Indonesian government, but there's no really a long-term planning. At least I have not seen it in those 20 years I'm here. And it's a frustration, of course. But we also don't really have a long plan, right? If there's something cool coming on our way and we think we can do it, we do it. And sometimes we say yes too often and we shoot ourselves in the foot and we shouldn't have said yes to this because now we actually have to do it. But I think a sense of flexibility is very important, right? Make things happen, make it work and try to do it as good as you can. And I think that's all we can.
Yeah. I know we're at time, but I can probably wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions I always like to ask. And then I have one final question related to the restaurant that I want to bring it back to. But what's the most influential book you've ever read?
What's the Animal Farm? No, I would say Gordon Ramsay is, what is it called? Biography. That's a good one. Yeah, good struggle. And then all the other. I love reading. I read 2 pages and I fall asleep these days. So there's not a lot of reading, but I would say it must be a book about cooking. So let's stick with that one.
What advice would you give your younger self?
I'm just go with the flow. If you're open for things, they will come on your way, and just go for it with all the energy and enthusiasm you have, and you figure it out.
Okay. And a new question I'm going to try to end with, second to last question, technically. When you look back from being the 14-year-old kid that started working in the kitchen in the Netherlands, now you've had many restaurant successes, some restaurant failures. You've learned a lot along the way. You have this massive new venture, Locavore NXT. How much of your success do you attribute to sheer grit, skill, hard work? And how much of it do you attribute to pure luck or timing?
I think that's a good 50-50 ratio. I think we touched on it earlier. I think this is an industry you need to get the work done, right? You need to get the hours going. You need to work, and you get better at it, right? And I still really enjoyed it. And I like the working, especially in the kitchen. Life is easy, right? It is and it isn't, right? But if you're in charge of one section, it can be beautiful. If everything goes, it flows well, and you're ready, and you got your prep sitting in nice containers with labels on them, and life is easy. But I think, especially our Locavore story, I think maybe me getting here is maybe more hard work than luck. I gave up other things, right? I might tell my young self, don't do this, but do something completely different. But I'm not going to, because I'm enjoying it. But yes, it came with a lot of things that my friends did and I did not do. But I think the Locavore story, we were exactly at the right time, at the right moment, at the right place, with the right concept. And I really feel that helped us a lot, right? We were the first doing this in Indonesia, and so I think there was a lot of luck involved.
Yeah. I like the question because I think there's a misconception around how people have success. And I think maybe there's two schools of thought, but neither one is accurate. I think where you landed is probably what is reality. I think one school of thought is just be a hard worker, put in the hours, and you're going to get to where you want to be. I think that's a fallacy, right? You can't do it on your own. You can't just put your nose down and keep working and keep grinding and keep putting out meals through the pass. You're going to have to find the mentors. You're going to have to find the investors. You're going to have to do these things. And there's work involved in doing that, but you don't know whose path you're going to cross. And that takes a bit of luck sometimes too. And like you said, the right moment, the right time, the right concept, also a bit of luck. The hard work set you up for the success and set you up to have the luck potentially. But yeah, I don't know anybody that can have success with just betting on being lucky. But also, I think the fallacy is that if you just work hard and keep grinding, that you'll get to where you want to be. But I don't necessarily believe that to be true in and of itself.
Yeah, no, I think you're saying it really right. But I think to become good at something, you need to spend the time and the energy. And if you're good at something, that helps to set you up for success or a bigger chance of having success, right? When I worked in kitchens, I worked really hard. I was very diligent, very disciplined. And then a chef will notice you, and he will take you under his wings, and it takes you places. So I think it goes hand in hand. But yes, it's very much about who do you meet. If you're a young cook and you meet the right person who believes in you and say, you know what, let's open a restaurant together and make it successful. Yeah, that's some luck. But also you worked yourself in that position to be noticed and to be taken out from the back, right? Because there's a lot of people doing this. So yes, I think working hard and being good at your craft works and helps, but it's a combination of the two, 100%.
Yeah. Great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Last unofficial question. Where can our listeners go find you and the restaurant at?
As in where we are in the world?
Both. Where are you at in the world? What's your address? What's your website? What is your Instagram handle? We'll include all of it in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, so we're in Bali. Most people know it. It's actually part of a country called Indonesia. A lot of people don't know that, which I think is very funny. Obviously, it's not fair because the Dutch have a history of Indonesia, so we might know it better than other people. But and then like I said earlier, we're in Ubud, which is, for me, it's my favorite part of Bali. It's green, it's lush, there's lots of rice field, lots of jungle, cultivated jungles. And I'm in Locavore NXT most of the time, and that's how I don't like the word, but that's our flagship restaurant. This is where it all, it's not where it all started, but with this concept, that's where it all started. And I don't know our Instagram handle, but it's something Locavore Next. We got a website also, that's locavorenext.com. Can't miss it. It takes you to our reservation system if you click on the right things. And then if you're ever in Bali, I think if you're into food and if you're into experience a culture through its food, then I think Locavore Next is the restaurant you should visit. But also our Indonesian restaurant that is called Restaurant Nusantara. And Nusantara is Indonesian for the archipelago, where we do lesser known Indonesian dishes from all around the country. And Indonesia, as most people don't know, it's a massive country. If you put the Indonesian map on top of the map of North America, it's sticking out either on the west and on the east. So it's crazy big. It takes you 4 hours to fly from the west to the east, and then I think also 6 transits. So it takes you maybe 2 days. But it's a big country and it's underestimated. It's beautiful. The people are beautiful. The people make this country, and you have to come if you haven't been.
It's on my list now. It wasn't before, but it's on my list. Eelke Plasmeijer, thank you for being on the podcast. Lovely conversation. Thank you for your time. Great learning about you, your journey, and Locavore Next.
Thanks for having me. I really like the conversation as well.
Thanks.
And that wraps up today's conversation on the Randall Osché Podcast. Thanks again to our guest for sharing their time, knowledge, and lessons with us. If the episode brought you any value, the best way to support the show is to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. That helps us reach more people like you. You can also visit podcast.randallosché.com for blog posts, full transcripts, and other episode resources. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep moving forward.